Thank you very much. Thank you, Ali, for the invitation. When I don't play ping pong with Greg, I'm a social scientist. So I study cybersecurity from a policy and behavioral perspective. And this is what I'm going to try to do in the 20 minutes I've been allocated. I'm going to start my timer now. So I'm going to talk about cyber resilience, or some people say cyber resiliency. It's pretty much the same to me. And I'm going to try to identify a few trends that I think are interesting in that perspective. And so why we need cyber resilience, what it is, how is this different from cybersecurity, what in the current context or environment is impacting cyber resilience, and what kind of practical or operational responses can we bring to bear to increase the cyber resilience of Canadian organizations. So in terms of concept, a few people already today have used the term cyber resilience. But what is it? Is it the same as cybersecurity? Not exactly. So cyber resilience, the way I define it in my work, so I do research interviewing people in a number of different organizations, is the ability of an organization to minimize the negative impact of adverse events, to maintain critical functions, to quickly recover, and to learn and adapt from those incidents. So it's not only a matter of knowing you're going to be breached or knowing you're going to be impacted, it's preparing for that, training your people, practicing what's going to happen, and making sure you're deploying systems that are going to make that response to these incidents much easier for you and less damaging for your organization. And this is where cyber resilience, in my view, is really different from cybersecurity, where cybersecurity implies that you're going to be able to predict and protect against threats. In cyber resilience, you accept the risks, you accept you're going to be hit, you accept your systems are not going to work 100% of the time. The intention is not to prevent a failure, it's to fail gracefully. So you're learning to fail instead of preventing failures. The approach is not only on technologies, it's also on the people who are going to handle those technologies. And a couple of people I interviewed in the big banks in London, Toronto, told me systems are never going to be the solutions to your problems. Your people are going to save your day in a time of crisis. You need to train people, you need to work with them. And you cannot be cyber resilient on your own. Cyber resilience is a networked practice, so you have to make your entire ecosystem cyber resilient. You cannot be resilient or cyber resilient in isolation of your partners. And that's why the talks this morning by Rod on supply chains were so important. Bell cannot be, or Rogers cannot be cyber resilient on their own. They have to make their whole supply chain cyber resilient. So that's why cyber resilience needs cybersecurity, but when you're cyber secure, that's not enough. Sorry for those of the vendors that are pretending the opposite. In terms of context, a few things have been happening lately that I think have had a major impact on cyber resilience. The first one is the war in Ukraine. So we've all heard about why the Russians have not attacked all the systems of the Ukrainian government, which is false, by the way. They've attacked massively. What we've seen also is that a lot of attacks carried out by Ukrainian private actors and international private actors against Russian systems. What we've also seen that's been less advertised is China attacking Russia to try to understand what's happening in their defense infrastructure. So what's happening now in the world is we have a lot of turbulence and everyone, public and private actors, attacking everyone else to spy on them, to understand, to undermine what they're doing. So an environment where it's really hard to predict what's going to happen, lots of uncertainty, and lots of potential collateral damage when one attacker doesn't understand the total implications of what they're doing. At the same time, we've had this uncertainty and massive turbulences, the adversaries are learning and innovating constantly. So this is what I'm talking about, a human problem. The machines are being operated, are being used by human adversaries who are innovating at the same rate that all the people in this room are trying to innovate to protect against attackers. So one of those innovations I've been tracking in my work is the ransomware cycle of innovation and adaptation. So ransomware has existed for more than 20 years. It's not a new thing. It's become a problem over the past couple of years because the operators of ransomware have innovated and have been able to actually extract a lot more money than they were able to previously do. Why is that? Because they've resorted to double extortion. Someone somewhere in Russia understood that actually companies are going to pay a lot more money not for them to disclose the stolen data than to recover data that they've backed up anyway. So that's double extortion. They're keeping on innovating. So now some ransomware groups are selling access to stolen data to traders. So those traders can short the stock of companies that have been hit by ransomware. So it's a new revenue stream from ransomware groups. Ransomware groups now are working with journalists, with negotiators, with security companies to give them better deals. They're finding entire new ways of attacking companies. So in that environment, cyber resilience becomes more and more important. Oh, and by the way, another late innovation of ransomware groups, now they're attacking insurance companies and managed security service providers to understand who is covered by an insurance policy, and then they're going down the list of all the covered companies because they know they're going to pay because they're covered by insurance. So this is another innovation, interesting innovation that we've identified. I'm not going to talk too much about the supply chain innovation, supply chain attacks as innovation, but you have to understand that this is a efficiency innovation. So the reason why attackers are going for the supply chain is it gives them access instantly to thousands, or in the case of Microsoft, 30,000 customers through the attack by the Hafnium group. So this is a gateway to thousands of potential targets in one single shot instead of having to go through 30,000 individual attacks. So this is very concerning, and this is why cyber resilience is very much needed. Now, against that backdrop of innovation, we have Canadian organizations that I would say are wholly unprepared. If you look at data from Statistics Canada, Statistics Canada is running a cybercrime and cybersecurity survey every 2 years, funded by Public Safety Canada, which is probably the most interesting piece of research in the entire world, because we are the only country with a representative sample of companies, because 89% of the companies surveyed have to respond to the questions by law. So we have the largest data set of companies being surveyed every second year on cybersecurity and cybercrime. What do we learn? Only 15% of companies in 2019 had a cybersecurity management policy, written policy, okay? 10% of them only have a business continuity plan. So if we want to work on the cyber resilience of companies in Canada, we have to take those 10% and make sure this number increases radically over the next few years. Only 10% report being aware of cybersecurity standards or being able to work with certification programs. Only 2.3% work with certification programs on cybersecurity. So we have a massive gap in terms of preparedness to cyber attacks and in their capacity or incapacity to respond to this type of attacks. And in Quebec with CyberEco, we also ran a survey in 2021. We found exactly the same type of very concerning numbers. So we have companies in Canada that are not very well prepared. And why is that? One of my hypothesis is that they believe that if they've got cyber insurance, they're covered, and the cyber insurance policy is going to protect them if they're hit by any chance. And someone mentioned, I think it was Rod this morning, that cyber insurers are actually losing more than they are earning. So if you go on the insurance regulator, Canadian insurance regulator's website for 2021, and you look at the data, you will learn that the loss ratio for cyber insurance in Canada is 307%, meaning for every dollar in insurance policy that insurers sell, they're losing $3. Okay, try to compute that. This is not a sustainable business. It's 120% loss ratio in the US. So what does it mean? It means that in 2022, it's becoming a lot harder to get cyber insurance. Policies have increased between 50 to 300% in 2022. The coverage limits now are decreasing, so the insurance companies are going to reimburse you only for 50%, mostly of what you're going to lose. Capacity restrictions, they're not going to extend cyber insurance to everyone that wants to be covered. I mean, Rod mentioned how difficult it is for Bell. Imagine for an SME that has far less resources to justify all the measures they're taking in cybersecurity, and the requirements are going to be a lot more stringent. So in 2022, if you want to have access to cyber insurance, you have to deploy multi-factor authentication, you have to deploy all kinds of controls that many small companies and medium-sized companies are absolutely not ready to implement. So we have a major issue on cyber insurance as well in terms of cyber resilience. But we have some good news as well, not only bad news. Some standards and regulation efforts are underway. So Canada, IZ has invested a lot of energy into deploying the CyberSecure Canada certification program with lots of controls, lots of online training, free, accessible online training. This is fine, but if you remember the very depressing statistics from StatsCan, maybe the current certification program is still a little bit too complicated for SMEs to be able to access. So we'll still need to think about how to make it more accessible, more approachable for SMEs in Canada. And Canada is a country of SMEs, but still a good effort from Canada on that front. And another interesting initiative coming out of the US is the NIST Cyber Resilient Systems Framework, which develops across 4 goals, 8 objectives, 14 different engineering techniques that can make your cyber systems more resilient. So that's very interesting because for the first time, you have a whole template where you can take your organizational needs and map those needs to engineering techniques that are very well explained and hopefully can help your organization increase your cyber resilience. In Europe, we've heard this morning about C26 in Europe. The EU is deploying the Network and Information Security Regulation second iteration, where they're expanding. So there has a lot of cyber resilience components in that new NIS 2 directive. And the trend the way it's going is a lot more critical infrastructures are being included in that directive. A lot of new coordination infrastructures are being deployed across Europe to make sure that national and international cyber crises are going to be handled in a much more coordinated way. This new regulation is also merging existing resilience standards with cyber resilience standards. So we're seeing a convergence, harmonizations of resilience, operational resilience, and cyber resilience. Finally, another interesting initiative out of Europe is the much more aggressive approach of regulatory authorities. So the European Central Bank now has deployed the TIBER EU framework, which is using red teaming exercises to test the cyber resilience of its regulated institutions. So the regulatory authority will send out red teams not to accept the compliance statements of the banks it regulates, but to test the limits, to stress test the capacity of financial institutions in Europe to respond to cyber attacks. There are also some local initiatives, and it's very interesting that we're meeting in New Brunswick today, because cyber resilience cannot be limited to critical infrastructures and to national initiatives. It also has to be deployed at a local level. So the EU, for example, which I find very interesting, has created, sorry, not the EU, the UK has created across the country a number of local cyber resilience centers where police organizations are working alongside private companies and other government authorities to provide SMEs with guidance, tools to make them more cyber resilient. So now we are bringing cyber resilience in the UK to the local level to be able to touch those SMEs that have a lot of difficulties understanding how you reach a more mature level of cybersecurity and how you start thinking about cyber resilience. In France, the French government has created an incubator for regional CSIRTs, so computer security incident response teams, and the central government is funding the incubation of local CERTs and CSIRTs. And I think also this is a very interesting model because it reflects the need to really bring those capacities much closer to the medium-sized companies and the small companies that cannot go to Ottawa, cannot systematically go to national resources because they have very limited capacity to absorb this knowledge. There are some operational tools to help companies and organizations implement those cyber resilience practices. So one of them is flexible IR. I'm not receiving any commission for any of those tools, but what I want to show you is beyond the principles and the theory of cyber resilience, now we start to see practical tools that help companies manage the complexity of making cyber resilience an organizational objective. So flexible IR enables you to map all the playbooks you have and enables you to map the response, all the contacts and organizations you have to work with to respond to an incident. Another tool is Castellan, now Kristen Risk Connect. And another tool is Fusion Risk Management. Those are platforms that try to better coordinate the complex response and all the players that have to be involved in cyber resilience. Cyber resilience is not limited in its response components to the cybersecurity professionals inside an organization. It really has to mobilize every single member of the organization. And that's why complex tools, platforms are needed to make sure everyone is on board and you can really coordinate all of that. I'm going to conclude because I think I've got only a minute left on the challenges to cyber resilience. There are two main challenges. The first one I see is measuring cyber resilience. You know, if you want things to happen inside an organization, you have to be able to measure it. And it's still very hard to produce metrics that can really state that an organization has reached a certain level of cyber resilience. The other problem I see with cyber resilience is there are plenty of psychological and organizational biases that prevent organizations from staying focused on cyber resilience. So the myopia bias, the amnesia bias, the optimism bias, the herd bias, all contribute to making it really difficult for organizations to, over the long term, being able to mobilize and to tap into resources that will ensure the organization stays resilient. So I think that we have, and that's what part of my future program of research, to try to map those biases and try to identify ways for organizations to work around those biases and to embed anti-bias technologies into their platforms so that it can bypass those natural and very human biases. So that's it for me. I think we have a few minutes more for questions. And Ali, remember, we have ping pong practice at 7 tonight. Thank you very much. Yes, Chris?
So for those who aren't here this morning, Chris Lynham with the RCMP. Benoît, great overview, particularly about the cyber resiliency aspect. So I guess the question I agree completely with you. How do we move from the CyberSecure being the main headline of what everybody needs to do to, we need everybody to be more cyber resilient and take on those type of activities? Easy question to answer.
So you have one more hour or so. So I think I would say I have one suggestion. Canada is actually, the Canadian federal government is consulting to have, consulting very broadly to renew its national cybersecurity strategy. I would say I would be very encouraged if through the consultations, we ended up with cyber resilience or cyber resiliency being listed as one of the top 4 or 5 priorities, with a list of practical steps and practical measures that the federal government would be implementing alongside its provincial partners, alongside the private sector, to build up the cyber resiliency of the whole Canadian digital ecosystem. Just like the UK did, just like other countries are doing. So to say, okay, well, we have a cybersecurity strategy, we have a number of pillars or components. One of those pillars is going to be cyber resiliency, and this is how we're going to achieve it. It could be redundancy, it could be diversity. I'm actually now trying to look at how diversity in the workforce is actually making a net contribution to the cyber resiliency of an organization, because you're diversifying, the perspective, you're diversifying the ways to look at possible responses to an attack. So if we maybe get one pillar, which is cyber resiliency, the national strategy, national cybersecurity strategy, I think it would be a good start. Thank you.